So I got a new camera for a very bizarre reason, which this will be a review for from mostly a Sony perspective, but I have played with or owned cameras from most manufacturers. However, this has now become a problem because honestly, I can't imagine anyone else doing this and buying a camera for this reason. And frankly, I just feel hesitant to even admit it, as it sounds dumb just thinking about it. Yet, first, anytime you pick up a new camera, you have to factor in the ecosystem of lenses that it belongs to, which is why so many camera people stay so loyal or are so tribal to their brand. Yet, with my Nikon and Sony lenses, they play well together and can easily adapt across both, or even with this Fuji, which I have rented, but that's a video for next time. But even E to X mount is doable, but not with this camera and not with this mount. So, as you might have guessed it,
okay, so this is a Lumix S9 in open gate, 6K at 24 frames per second. I'm playing with a new LUT called skin optimization. There's so many options and so many LUTs that are great, but finding the right one is tricky, but you can tinker with it. So the Lumix Lab is a huge sort of benefit of having this system, and it's really fun to play with and try to find sort of the best look. I'm not sure I found it yet, but this one's pretty good for now.
Yes, I picked up a Panasonic recently with this Lumix, which I'm not even sure if I'm going to keep it long term, even though I got a killer deal on it that also included this second lens thrown in for free, which confuses things even more. And honestly, if someone could engineer an autofocus adapter, which I'm pretty sure might not even be physically possible, that is to adapt an L to E mount or vice versa because of the flange distance. But if they could, I might imagine keeping the lenses and consider getting rid of the body, or, well, I'll get into that. Now, let me say this though, this will be my first of many S9 videos in which I have a ton of POV photo walk videos to contrast it between, and in similar settings to cut back and forth with all my cameras, as I love snapping pics in the same places or of the same subjects to try to pixel peep between, or just regular peep. And along with the little peeping at the park, I mean, the non-creepy kind that is.
So here I am at my local park, my favorite place to do suburban photo shoots. Every camera I've ever had, I brought here and tested, try to match shots between them, so it's easier to compare. So yeah, I just love being out here in nature, with bees flying around me.
But all that said, I will in the near future be more thoroughly comparing the S9 against my Sony a7C II in a separate video. But here's a few clips, because for me, how good a camera's IBIS and electronic stabilization is a big factor when choosing a camera. And we all know with at least this, Lumix is the best, as you can see. And here's the Sony a7C II. And briefly, just for shake's sake, let's see how this looks against a camera without IBIS, like the Fuji X-M5. So now I have my Sony FX3, which I tend to keep all rigged up for A-rolls like this and for work, along with my other Sony, the A7C II, which I tend to fly on a gimbal or just use in my B cam, also for work. And I've also used the ZV-E1 or the ZV-1 as my C cam, which has now been replaced by my Pocket 3 or my GoPro sometimes. But my A7C and now my A7C II have been my go-to travel cams in the past until I got my Nikon, the ZFC, which I know sounds surprising, but I'll explain. And then I picked up the Fuji X-M5 as a possible replacement for that, thinking I needed an APS-C camera until I got my hands on the Lumix S9. So you might be thinking, what hole is there within my hybrid camera needs? What hole am I trying to fill with that S9? Or where does it fit in to my hole or to the mix of cameras? And again, I assure you this reason I bought it is probably not the reason you'd expect. And yet with so many cameras come so many reviews. But you may have noticed that I have been slow of late releasing these reviews, so I tried with disastrous effects to get AI to do it for me.
So I got a new camera, and this is now a problem. I picked up a Panasonic recently, which I'm not even sure if I like or am going to keep. So now I have my Sony FX3, which I keep rigged up for work, along with my Sony A7C II for gimbal work and travel, my Nikon ZFC for play, and now a Lumix S9. Why would I get the S9? Well, it's not for the reasons you'd expect.
But yeah, not yet AI overlords. We still have a few months. So I've been slow on my camera reviews for several key reasons. The main one, which I'm really excited to share and can finally do so because of client work. But even before that, I've been slow at publishing due to the fact that sometimes it takes me a year or more of using a camera before I feel comfortable sharing my findings, because I want to understand it as thoroughly as possible before I talk about it. Whereas the S9, it's still a fresh camera for me many months later, and it's something I'll touch on in a bit, but this is not a pick up and immediately enjoy camera in my experience. And I've only now just found a decent LUT that I like, whereas I found a bunch that I didn't. Whereas with my Nikon ZFC, it was love at first snap, and I'm still working on my ZFC review over a year later, which I know you might think you're not interested in it at all, but you should be, because it is both my cheapest camera, I got it for like $600 used, and also arguably my worst camera, but it is also maybe the coolest one, and up until now, my favorite to use, even with portrait work, and has been the one I have traveled the most with of late, seriously by like a lot. Which might be about to change, especially when viewed side by side at my favorite two places to shoot, the arcade and the hot dog train. So I haven't been posting camera reviews as often because I've actually been busy using all my cameras for work, including the S9, because currently I'm making videos for 3 separate YouTube channels. There's this one, then my film review channel, which I'm attempting to revive from the dead as we speak. Why is Nosferatu not scary? And is this a misstep or a masterpiece? And then what I've been grinding on for the last 8 months is that I'm show running or creating white label content for somebody else's channel. I basically developed a hybrid reality show about real estate, like a non-douchey version of Selling Sunset, that Netflix show, for an equally successful broker here in LA. And without question, I've made some of the best work I've done over there, shooting it all by myself with many of these cameras. And the channel will be linked below if you want to check it out, even if you don't like real estate content, because the first few episodes are more like documentary work with some real tears and comedy and a great lead and cast. So I think anyone could enjoy it. And I'm proud of it, which is a weird thing to say, but I'm producing, directing, writing, editing, lighting, media managing, etc. And I only say all this as a point of reference with which cameras I choose to use. Again, I am the solo camera operator using mostly my FX3, and then occasionally my A7C II and the DJI Osmo Pocket 3, which has been a lifesaver in so many ways. And if you've seen my review for that, you'll know. Now, after some time with my DJI Osmo Pocket 3 in a bunch of different settings and scenarios, I can definitively say that this thing can do it all and might just be a legit cinema camera. But just recently I started bringing my S9 to work with me with mixed results. But because I'm delivering in both 16:9 and 9:16 formats, it made sense to try it. Until I got it into my timeline, and the higher resolution in OpenGate had some surprising drawbacks that I don't hear enough people talking about. But I get the allure of the high resolution OpenGate. It's that new shiny feature, and after renting the Fuji, where I also felt the urge to only shoot in OpenGate with that camera too.
Okay, so now I want to test two OpenGate cameras. I have the Lumix S9 and the Fuji X-M5. One is full frame and one is APS-C, and one has industry-leading stabilization and the other has no IBIS. Now, I think both of these cameras are amazing for different reasons, and funny enough, they're pretty similarly sized. But the difference between a $2,000 camera and a $900 camera, you should be able to tell. But it is surprising how good the Fuji is in comparison.
And I was initially loving the aspect ratio, but my memory cards seemed to get full a lot faster, and all my assets on Premiere Pro, which were proportioned to 16:9 and 4K or 1080, all got distorted and actually harder to edit, export, and upload with. So it might just be a me thing, but it's not as cool as I thought initially with my specific workflow. Except for it does look great and it's easy to crop in on or take a screen grab of for thumbnails, which here also got an assist from this amazing sharp 50mm lens. And before I dive into the lenses, it's worth noting that Panasonic shipped in my bundle this free lens, a super compact 50mm f1.8, which is a fantastic portrait video lens. And with the kit, it's a pretty perfect pick up and shoot pair, but makes me again wish I could adapt this lens to my Sony. Because now after using cameras from almost every manufacturer out there, even this weird Canon, which I know doesn't quite count, and this may be controversial to say, but for me right now, Sony still is the only camera I fully trust for client work in the way that I shoot on my job, specifically the FX3, because of the style of the body, the autofocus, and the dynamic range. Although the S9's is still pretty impressive. So here's me in auto and not in log, just to see what you'd get if you picked up the camera and shot outside at night. And now here's more a controlled test indoors.
Okay, I just want to come on here real quickly because I am in ISO 25,600. I was in auto ISO and it was pitch black in here. There's no lights, it's overcast and rainy out, and I thought it was dark and I'd reach my max ISO, so I manually changed it. In fact, I am at 25,600, so I can go up to 32,000, 40,000, and 51,200. Now, it's probably grainy, noisy, as you can tell, but let me go down to, I think, typically, now I'm at 6,400. Put it down to the base, 100. It's pitch black. I don't know if you can even see out there. Yeah, you can see my blinds. It's dark in here, so I'm gonna go back to auto, and you'll see, I think I need to change my maximum auto setting, but, so let's go back and climb, 6,400, 2,000, 5,000, 12,800, which is usually what I would be in S-Log 3 on my Sony, but this is not in log. This is just the new LUT that I found that I like. And this is pretty good, pretty clean by comparison. It's worth noting that there must be some noise reduction happening, which you can also customize, but it is good to know that on this S9, you can shoot in the dark.
But it's worth now showing how it performs in log, which typically with S-Log 3, I use my GAMUT Rec 709 conversion LUT because it's great, easy to use, and was only $25. Yet they don't have one for Lumix yet, so I've been creating my own, which is less than ideal as I'm not great at conversions, but I did have help with Premiere Pro's mediocre assistance. But as I was saying, I rely on Sony for client work, especially when using S-Log 3 with my FX3, and I can lean heavily on its flawless autofocus, so I can trust it as a solo run-and-gun shooter and producer and gaffer, as I don't have time for a camera that I can't just pick up and shoot on the fly and nail focus with. However, I'm sure if I actually went all in on a real Canon, the new potato on the block, I might be able to say the same thing about the C400 or C80 if I had it. Yeah. I think for my next camera, if it ever materializes and has the few essential upgrades that I'm looking for, like IBIS, it would still be with Sony, and my hopes for the FX6 Mark II, because until then, I'm not spending $25K on the Burano, which I did get to play with at Cinegear last year, but even upgrading to an FX6, I might have to sell a bunch of cameras off first. Unless Lumix surprises us in the future, because as of now, they are doing things that Sony can't. And there's talk that they're working on an FX3 rival, which would be tempting. So I'm slowly building trust with the brand's performance, even on the job. So then if I'm such a Sony fan man, as I'm not a boy, I'm far too old to qualify as a fanboy of anything, but then if I'm already invested so heavily in Sony and spent so much time with Nikon, including the ZF, and now dipping my toe in Fuji, so then why did I pick up this camera for other than the obvious reasons above, like open gate, which will allow me to deliver in multiple formats, and then the stabilization. So if it's not because of that, then what is it? Well, for me, the real push, which does sound silly and likely reveals I have a worse camera addiction than I thought, but I bought this camera for the kit lens. Yep, you heard me, this $100 add-on. So first, to back up, the reason I take my Nikon ZFC everywhere is because of the size with the kit lens. It's the perfect travel camera for me because you get a fantastic 24-70 equivalent range, a vibey camera with amazing color profiles, especially their black and white, which for me, Nikon makes the best mono out there. Yet, it is worth noting that Lumix does have a few solid Leica-inspired mono looks too.
If you've seen any of my other videos, you'll know I'm a sucker for a good black and white. So I wanted to show you the difference between my black and white, which is a subtle change and adjustment, but it has a big impact in my opinion. So this is my Picture Profile 5, and this is Sony's black and white. Now, as you can see, the blacks are lifted, there's less contrast, and for me, it's less dramatic, but that overall has a general effect that I think makes this just a little bit lifeless. And so just by punching things up, changing the curve a little bit, you get this more high contrast look, which I just think has a lot of drama in it. And it makes me want to pick up this camera and shoot it more. That's why I love Nikons and why I've tinkered so much with Sony's. And this is their Leica mono, and you can tell their blacks are pretty low, so you can imagine what the S shape might look like. And it's one that I would try to design on my own. So the fact that I get this straight out of camera for my JPEGs or for videos makes this a sort of great street photography and videography camera just to take on the go with you. So yeah, what do you think?
But even that, I still prefer Nikon's black and white. So with my most recent trip abroad, where I was in Portugal and, well, in Lisbon to be precise, the ZFC was clutch in every way. Well, almost every way, except with this. Because the video quality is less than clutch, and the stabilization is awful, and of course, it's an APS-C camera. But worst of all, with my shooting style, the 24mm is still not wide enough. So I was looking to replace it and thought, no way would I find a lens with a wider range, equally as small and full frame, that seemed like a pipe dream. And now even the lens I keep attached to my FX3 for shooting my real estate show is Tamron's 20-40 f2.8, which is fantastic. And originally I bought it for my A7C II as the one and done travel lens, which I took to London with me with okay results, but it's still much bigger and less nimble than I'd like. So the conundrum has always been, even when I had the original A7C with a kit lens, and even though the size and range is great, but it's a 28-60. So it seemed that I was doomed to find an APS-C camera with probably bad stability in video, like the Fuji XM5. And even with that, there are still almost no wide pancake zooms, even for APS-C. So you can imagine my surprise when I saw a full frame, vibey camera with IBIS and crazy stabilization and a flip out screen, which is also essential for me with travel, with a wide pancake zoom of 18-40. It just ticked too many boxes for me to ignore. And then when I first experienced that it actually had a zoom range of 18 to 125 millimeters in photo, that's right, 18 to 125, which I know is just a digital crop, but as you can see, it's totally usable and way better than you'd expect. And all this with a free lens and a discount for only $1,500, it was sort of a no-brainer, and made me then consider the fact that reality might in fact be a simulation, because this seems suspiciously too good to be true. Until I started immediately looking for ways to rationalize the purchase by hoping I would find a way to adapt this kit lens to my Sony A7C II, but alas, none exists and may never exist. And now I just wonder how I can jump timelines into that reality that it does exist in. And until then, I am stuck in L mount, or do I just get rid of the camera altogether? But the more I've been using it, the more it's actually been growing on me. So the question that I keep getting is, which could be the determining factor here, is how is the autofocus?
Can you see my head or not?
Yeah, try it. I'm gonna videotape it. Hold on a second. You keep going.
How long?
Well, it's definitely a lot stickier than I thought it would be, even in low light. And actually, I have a very few complaints with it. Well, except for this one. And this is the thing that has taken me the longest to get used to. The AF detection box, that yellow box of sadness. But boy, is it annoyingly distracting, especially compared to Sony's teeny tiny little eye AF box.
So this is the Lumix autofocus. I mean, it's sticky, it's good. And my argument against this display, it being busy and hard to see, is probably ridiculous for people who've always had a Lumix, compared to eye autofocus, where you have a little tiny box on your pupil. Okay, so here is my next test, which is my Sony. And look how small that eye autofocus box is. I mean, it's as small as it gets. And yeah, so you can see why, coming from Sony and then going to Lumix, how different that is. And I could probably even clean up this display, I think, even more, to have more of a live view. But everything's within my 16:9 square.
And even Chris and Jordan at Petapixel agree with me.
But there are still a couple things that, I wish would improve. So first off, when you're shooting animals, we get the nice little box around the eye. That's great. But when we're doing people and portraits, we're still getting the crosshair across the eye. And I really find that distracting. And I wish we could change that, but that's still the same way that all the other Panasonic cameras work.
Now, as a sidebar, and I'll continue to say this with any camera that handles this way, is I have a grip gripe with the S9. And really with any camera that you are almost forced to buy a grip from small rig from to hold these cameras. And I had the same complaint with the Nikon ZF or the XM5. So for me, if you have to buy an accessory to hold a camera, it should be included in the box. And although I didn't need the thumb grip, I do find it tenfold more comfortable to hold it with it on. But as you can see, it begins the snowball effect of customizing your cameras, as after I put the grip on, I added a vinyl sticker because for some reason they only sell the silver top with the international version. So then I added the thumb grip, which I further customized by spray painting it to match. And I usually tinker with all my camera's looks, with skins and the like, as I have done with my A7C II. So they stand out a bit to not just appear unique, but different from each other, in spite of the fact they couldn't be more different to use. Because, well, another gripe I have is with the menu system, which I find personally very non-intuitive and relatively clunky. And for the love of everything holy, I could not for the longest time find a good LUT or quickly create one that I liked until recently. It's almost like there's too much freedom or too many mediocre LUTs to choose from, and I still prefer Nikon's picture controls, and I've also grown accustomed to playing with Sony's, which I know is also very non-intuitive, but I absolutely love my newest Sony custom profile that I just made. And funny enough, it seems to match the Lumix one that I use now, which is called Luminous City, and it's free to download on the Lumix Lab app, so I'm finally in a good place there. And like I said, I will be doing a proper A7C II versus Lumix S9 comparison video as soon as I can, because this topic deserves a deep dive, as there are of course a ton of clear wins for Sony, like ergonomics, the EVF, the resolution, and obviously autofocus. But there are a ton of wins for the S9 too, like the Lumix Lab, which is good, but like the camera, I probably just need more time playing with. And aside from the open gate and stabilization, my favorite thing is still the kit lens, which started this whole nonsensical journey. But this is just the beginning of my review for this camera, as I'm about to hop on a plane to Hawaii to take the S9 on its first real spin to see if it can be my new go-to travel camera before I take it to Vegas for NAB. But in the meantime, feel free to check out my work from my other channels linked below, and thank you for your time and attention, and consider following along and subscribing to this one, as I have a bunch more videos about videos like this on the way. All right, thanks guys, bye.